The autumn sunset painted the Colorado mountains gold as Katherine Jenkins stared at the crumpled letter in her trembling hands, reading the words for the 10th time though they'd already carved themselves into her heart. Found a claim worth more than our life here. Don't wait for me. Her husband of 3 years had abandoned their struggling ranch for the gold fields of California, leaving nothing but crushing debt and broken promises behind. Katherine wiped away a tear with the back of her hand as she gazed across the barren fields of her ranch outside Silver Creek. The year was 1875, and survival for a woman alone on the frontier seemed an impossible burden. The bank would come calling soon, demanding payment on loans she couldn't possibly make good on. "Damn you, Thomas," she whispered, her voice carried away by the mountain wind. "Damn you for your dreams and damn me for believing them." She had 1 month before the bank would foreclose, 1 month to somehow save the only home she had left. Katherine folded the letter neatly, tucking it into her apron pocket as she made her way back to the small cabin that stood as testament to 2 years of backbreaking work. The cattle had long been sold off to pay earlier debts, the fields lay fallow, and the once promising future she and Thomas had planned now seemed like a cruel joke. The next morning, Katherine hitched her wagon and headed into Silver Creek with the last of her preserves and 2 handmade quilts. The weekly market might bring enough to buy supplies for another week, but not nearly enough to make a dent in what she owed the bank. The town bustled with activity, miners passing through, merchants hawking wares, and the usual characters that populated any frontier settlement. Katherine set up her small table next to Mrs. Holloway's bread stand, arranging her jars of preserved peaches and blackberry jam alongside the painstakingly sewn quilts. "Katherine Jenkins," a booming voice called out. Katherine looked up to see Will Xanders, foreman of the neighboring Rocking X Ranch, striding toward her. His tall frame and broad shoulders made him an imposing figure, but it was his eyes piercing blue beneath the brim of his worn Stetson that always caught her attention. "Mr. Xanders," she replied with a polite nod. "Can I interest you in some preserves today?" Will removed his hat, running calloused fingers through sun-bleached brown hair. "Heard about Thomas. The whole town's talking." Katherine stiffened. "Is that so, and what exactly are they saying?" "That he's a damn fool." Will's directness was both startling and oddly comforting, leaving good land and a better woman for some pipe dream out west. "Well, that makes 2 of us who think so," Katherine replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Though I suspect his dreams involve more gold and less farming than I'd imagined." Will nodded, his expression serious. "Word is the bank's coming for your place. News travels fast in Silver Creek." "I've got 15 hands that could use some good home cooking," Will said, gesturing to her preserves. "I'll take the lot, and those quilts winter's coming and the bunkhouse could use them." Katherine eyed him suspiciously. "I don't need charity, Mr. Xanders." "It's not charity when I'm getting something in return, Mrs. Jenkins," he replied. "And it's Will, always has been." The transaction left Katherine with more money than she'd expected to make all month, but still nowhere near enough to save the ranch. As she loaded her empty baskets back into the wagon, Will approached again, this time leading his chestnut stallion. "I've got a proposition," he said, leaning against her wagon. "Rocking X needs help. Cook left last month, and the boys are about to mutiny over Billy's attempts at biscuits. I need someone who can run a proper kitchen." "You're offering me a job as a cook," Will nodded. "Room and board plus wages. Good wages." Pride warred with practicality in Katherine's mind. She needed money desperately, but working as a domestic felt like admitting defeat. "Think about it," Will added, noting her hesitation. "Offer stands." That night, Katherine sat at her kitchen table, calculating figures by lamplight. Even with Will's generous purchase, she couldn't make the payments. The bank would take everything, and she'd have nothing to show for years of struggle. 3 days later, with her few personal belongings packed in 2 trunks, Katherine arrived at the Rocking X. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure with a wide porch, nothing like the modest cabin she'd shared with Thomas. Will greeted her at the door, a surprising gentleness in his manner as he carried her trunks inside. "Your quarters are through here," he said, leading her to a comfortable room off the kitchen. "Used to belong to Mrs. Peterson before she moved back east. Hope it suits." It's more than adequate, Catherine replied, surveying the clean, well-appointed space. Thank you, Will nodded. I'll leave you to get settled. Supper's usually at 6. 15 hungry cowboys who haven't had a decent meal in weeks. The first few days at Rocking X established a rhythm. Catherine rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent mornings baking and planning meals, served lunch to whichever hands were around the main house, then prepared supper. The work was exhausting but straightforward, and she found unexpected comfort in the routine. Will was rarely present, often riding out before dawn and returning after dark, but when their paths crossed, Catherine noticed how his eyes followed her. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, there was respect there, and something else she couldn't quite name. One evening, as Catherine was finishing the dinner dishes, Will entered the kitchen. He looked tired, dust from the trail still clinging to his clothes. "Bank's putting your place up for auction next week," he said without preamble. Catherine set down the plate she was drying. "I expected as much." "I've been thinking," Will continued, removing his hat and turning it in his hands. "Land adjacent to mine would be valuable, extra water rights, extended grazing. Are you saying you intend to bid on my ranch?" Catherine felt a surge of indignation. "I'm saying I could. But I'd rather make you an offer directly." "The ranch isn't mine to sell anymore, Mr. Xanders," Will, he corrected, "and it could be if you had the money to pay the bank." Catherine looked at him suspiciously. "What exactly are you suggesting? A partnership of sorts?" "I provide the funds to clear the debt. You retain ownership of the land. We work it together, run cattle, maybe try that orchard you were planning." "Why would you do that?" Catherine asked, genuinely perplexed. Will was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Because Thomas Jenkins is chasing gold in the streams of California when he left behind something far more precious right here." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that neither was ready to acknowledge fully. "I'll think about it," Catherine finally replied. That night, Catherine lay awake, considering Will's offer. It seemed too good to be true, a chance to keep her land without obligation or marriage. Yet something in his manner, in the way he'd spoken about Thomas, suggested motivations beyond business sense. The next morning, Catherine found Will in the barn, saddling his horse for the day's ride. "I accept your offer," she said, "but I want terms written down. This is business, Mr. Xanders, not charity." A smile tugged at the corner of Will's mouth. "Wouldn't expect anything less from you, Mrs. Jenkins." They rode together to Silver Creek that afternoon, meeting with the banker and drawing up papers that would allow Catherine to retain ownership of her ranch while establishing a business partnership with Will. As they left the bank, Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said simply as they mounted their horses. Will tipped his hat. "Don't thank me yet. We've got a lot of work ahead if we're going to make that land profitable." The following weeks saw Catherine dividing her time between cooking duties at the Rocking X and working alongside Will to revitalize her ranch. They repaired fencing, cleared irrigation ditches, and planned the spring planting. Will brought in a small herd of cattle to graze the western pasture, teaching Catherine about livestock management along the way. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Catherine's cabin after a long day's work, Will asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Did you love him?" "Thomas, I mean." Catherine was silent for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. "I thought I did, or maybe I loved the idea of him, the dreams we shared. But now I wonder if he ever truly saw me at all, or if I was just convenient. Someone to cook and clean while he chased fantasies." Will's hand found hers in the growing darkness, a gentle touch that conveyed more than words could. Some men spend their lives searching for gold, never realizing the real treasures are right in front of them. Catherine felt her pulse quicken as his fingers entwined with hers. "And what about you, Will Xanders? What treasures are you searching for?" His eyes met hers, intense and honest. "I think I've already found what I'm looking for, just waiting to see if she feels the same." The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching horses. Will stood, hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. 3 riders appeared in the fading light, and Catherine recognized the center figure immediately, Silas Morgan, the banker. "Evening, Mrs. Jenkins, Mr. Xanders," Morgan called out, reining his horse to a stop. "Seems congratulations are in order. Word is you two have formed quite the partnership." "Our arrangement is business, Mr. Morgan," Catherine replied coolly, "nothing more." Of course, the banker smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Though I must say it's fortunate you found such a generous partner so quickly after your husband's departure. Will stepped forward, his stance protective. Something we can help you with, Morgan, or did you ride all this way just to gossip? Morgan's smile faltered. Actually, I've received some interesting correspondence. Seems Thomas Jenkins has had a change of heart about his California adventure. Letter came asking about his wife and property. Thought you'd want to know he might be headed back this way. The news hit Katherine like a physical blow. Thomas coming back, after abandoning her to financial ruin and humiliation. That land is legally mine now, Katherine said, finding her voice. The partnership agreement with Mr. Xanders is binding. Oh, I'm well aware, Morgan replied. Just thought you should prepare yourselves for a reunion. Good evening to you both. As the banker and his companions rode away, Katherine felt the world tilting beneath her. Will's hand on her arm steadied her. He's just trying to rattle you, Will said quietly. Even if Thomas does come back, he has no claim on the ranch anymore. You made sure of that. It's not the ranch I'm worried about, Katherine admitted. It's facing him. Hearing whatever excuses he's concocted, and now the whole town will be watching, waiting to see what happens. Will's expression darkened. You don't owe him anything, not your time, not an explanation. I know, Katherine sighed. But I at least want to tell him exactly what I think of a man who abandons his wife for a pocket full of dust. That night, Katherine stayed at her own cabin for the first time since taking the job at Rocking X. Will insisted on remaining as well, sleeping on a bedroll near the fireplace, despite her protestations that she would be fine alone. His presence was comforting, though the possibility of Thomas's return cast a shadow over the tentative happiness she'd begun to find. A week passed with no sign of Thomas, and Katherine began to wonder if Morgan had simply been trying to cause trouble. She and Will settled back into their routine, working side by side to prepare the ranch for winter. One crisp morning, as Katherine was feeding the chickens they'd recently acquired, she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Looking up, she saw a dusty, haggard-looking man riding a worn-out mare down the path to the cabin. It took her a moment to recognize her husband beneath the unkempt beard and hollow cheeks. Katherine, Thomas called, dismounting awkwardly. My God, it's good to see you. She stood frozen, the feed basket clutched in her hands. Thomas. He stepped toward her, arms outstretched as if for an embrace, but stopped when she took a step back. I know I've got a lot of explaining to do, he began, dropping his arms. Things didn't work out in California the way I'd hoped, but I've come back with enough to get us back on our feet. Us. Katherine repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. There is no us anymore, Thomas. You made that clear when you left without so much as a goodbye. Thomas looked genuinely confused. I left a letter explaining everything. I always planned to come back once I'd struck it rich. What you left was debt and heartbreak, Katherine replied, her voice steady despite the anger churning inside her, and a ranch about to be foreclosed on. The bank was threatening foreclosure. Thomas's surprise seemed genuine. I had no idea things had gotten that bad. Because you weren't here, Katherine said simply. You were chasing dreams while reality was falling apart around me. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Will rode up, dismounting quickly when he saw Thomas. Everything all right, Katherine? He asked, his eyes never leaving Thomas. Thomas looked between them, realization dawning on his face. So the rumors are true. You wasted no time finding a replacement, did you? Mr. Xanders saved our ranch when you abandoned it, Katherine corrected, and me along with it, our ranch. Thomas laughed bitterly. Last I checked, my name was on those papers too. Will stepped forward. Not anymore. Katherine owns this land outright now, with our partnership agreement giving me partial interest in the operations only. Thomas's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. And what else do you have a partial interest in, Xanders? That's enough, Thomas, Katherine intervened. You gave up any right to question me the day you walked out that door. I came back for you, Thomas insisted. I still love you, Katherine. Whatever happened while I was gone, what happened, Katherine interrupted, was that I discovered my own strength. I learned that I don't need a man who sees me as secondary to his ambitions. Thomas's expression hardened. So you're choosing him, a man you barely know. I'm choosing myself, Katherine replied firmly. Will sees value in me and this land that you never did. He understands that true wealth isn't found in gold streams. You're the treasure Thomas will never find, Will added quietly, his eyes on Katherine. Because he doesn't know how to recognize what's truly precious. Thomas looked between them, desperation giving way to anger. This isn't over, that's still my home and you're still my wife. Not for long, Katherine replied. The papers for divorce are already filed. Judge Williams should have them ready by next week. Thomas's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing Katherine's arm roughly. In an instant, Will was between them, his fist connecting with Thomas's jaw with enough force to send him stumbling backward. You put hands on her again and it'll be the last thing you do, Will warned, his voice deadly quiet. Thomas recovered, rubbing his jaw. This isn't the end of it, Katherine. I'll be in town when you come to your senses. As Thomas mounted his horse and rode away, Katherine felt a strange sense of closure. The man she had once loved was now a stranger to her, his return stirring none of the emotions she might have expected. Are you all right? Will asked, gently examining her arm where Thomas had grabbed her. Yes, Katherine nodded. Better than I expected to be, actually. Seeing him now, it's like looking at a stranger. Will's concerned expression softened. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Katherine Jenkins. Not quite as strong as I pretend to be, she admitted, but getting there. The weeks that followed were tense. Thomas took up residence in Silver Creek, spreading rumors and trying to gather sympathy for his situation. Few took his side. Abandoning one's wife wasn't viewed kindly in frontier communities where survival depended on reliability and commitment. Katherine finalized the divorce, standing tall before Judge Williams despite the whispers that followed her through town. Will remained steadfast beside her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but making his feelings increasingly clear through actions rather than words. As winter settled over the Colorado mountains, Katherine and Will established a comfortable routine between the Rocking X and her ranch, which they had begun calling the Twin Pines. Cattle from both properties were combined into a larger herd, with Will's experienced hands managing the livestock while Katherine focused on making the homestead productive again. One snowy evening, as they sat before the fireplace in Katherine's cabin reviewing accounts, Will cleared his throat nervously. I've been thinking, he began, setting aside his ledger. The arrangement we have is working well, but it makes sense to consider a more permanent solution for both properties. Katherine looked up, a smile playing at her lips. Are you proposing a business merger, Mr. Xanders? I'm proposing a good deal more than that, Mrs. Jenkins, Will replied, reaching for her hand. If you'd be amenable. I might be, Katherine said softly, though I've only just freed myself from one marriage. Will nodded. I know, and I'm not asking for an immediate answer, just want you to know where I stand. Where I've stood since long before Thomas left. Katherine's eyes widened slightly. Before? Why do you think I never came calling all those Sundays when the other ranchers' sons did? Couldn't bear to see you with him, knowing you'd chosen Thomas. But I waited, hoping someday you might see me differently. And now, Katherine asked, her heart racing, now I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to show you what a real partnership looks like, one where neither of us is ever second to anything, not gold, not cattle, not ambition. Katherine leaned forward, her lips meeting his in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened into something more certain. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I think, Katherine whispered, that I'd like very much to explore this partnership further, Mr. Xanders. Spring brought new beginnings to Twin Pines. The orchards Katherine had always dreamed of were planted along the eastern slope, while cattle grazed the western pastures. Word came that Thomas had moved on to the silver mines in Nevada, his brief return to Silver Creek forgotten in the constant churn of frontier life. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers covering the meadows and the mountains standing sentinel in the distance, Katherine Jenkins became Katherine Xanders in a small ceremony attended by the Rocking X hands and friends from town. Judge Williams pronounced them husband and wife beneath an arch of apple blossoms that Will had insisted on constructing himself. I told you, Will whispered as they shared their first dance on the packed earth of the ranch yard, you were always the real treasure. Katherine smiled up at her new husband. And I've learned that true wealth isn't in what you find, she replied, but in who you choose to share your life with. As the sun set on their wedding day, painting the Colorado sky in hues of gold and purple, Katherine and Will stood on the porch of the cabin they would soon replace with a larger home for the family they hoped to build. The Twin Pines and Rocking X would eventually merge into one of the most successful operations in the territory, but that evening, all that mattered was the future stretching before them. "No gold rush could ever compare to this," Will said, his arm around Catherine's waist as they watched the first stars appear. "No," Katherine agreed, leaning into his embrace. "This is the kind of treasure that lasts a lifetime." Years later, when their children would ask about how they came together, Katherine would smile at the memory of those difficult days that led to such unexpected joy. The husband who left her for gold had, in his absence, given her the greatest gift, the chance to discover her own strength and to recognize true value when she found it in the steadfast heart of a cowboy who saw her worth from the very beginning. Throughout the decades that followed, as the West changed around them and frontier towns grew into settled communities, the Xanders Ranch stood as testament to what could be built on the foundation of mutual respect and genuine love. Katherine and Will faced the challenges of frontier life together: drought years, harsh winters, market fluctuations, always stronger as partners than either could have been alone. And on quiet evenings when they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, they would sometimes reflect on the twists of fate that had brought them together, grateful for the hardships that had revealed what truly mattered, and for the wisdom to recognize the treasure they had found in each other.